So good morning and good afternoon to people joining us in the Philippines. It must be about 4 p.m. there. Welcome to this practical session on how to write a successful proposal for a grant for the Endangered Archives Program, or the EAP. This British Library initiative facilitates the digitizing of archives around the world that are in danger of destruction, neglect, or physical deterioration. Since 2004, I was looking up the stats. The EAP has provided grants to more than 400 projects and digitizing over 8 million images. And to note, 25,000 soundtracks. So I didn't know this, Jody, but it also includes sound, no? Sound
That's
archive.
right. Yes, yeah. Yes. And to be honest, those figures are out of date because during the first lockdown, we put up 1.5 million images. So I think it's now 9.5 million images that are online. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine. Yeah. So, so let me introduce you to Adrian. Our resource speaker is Dr. Adrian Hermann. He is a professor of religion and society and is the director of the Department of Religious Studies at the University of Bonn in Germany. He recently concluded a grant from the EAP, digitizing the IFI archives from the St. Andrew's Theological Seminary in Quezon City. So in this workshop, Professor Hermann has very kindly agreed to talk about the project, walking us through writing the proposal to its implementation and just kind of practical things that might be helpful to those who are interested. After about 30-40 minutes, we will open up the discussion to look at topics like maybe identifying archives that the EAP will most likely fund, maybe best practices and stuff like that. So do be ready with your questions. The more specific, the better. And pop them in the Q&A box. If we don't get to answer some of the questions, we will be recording this session and we will be answering some of them if you pop in your email as well. We will upload this recording to the Philippine Studies channel on YouTube after this session. Also joining us for the Q&A segment is Jody Butterworth, who is the curator for the EAP, and she oversees the digitized content output of EAP grants. Yeah, and may I also mention that she is a SOAS alum. So I was very happy when I heard that. I was like, "Ooh, I kind of know where her heart is coming from SOAS." So yes, we're very pleased to join us, that you can join us, Jody. So without much ado, let me turn you over to Adrian.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be able to share this now that the project is finally complete. And I'm going to give a short presentation to just give some idea of what we have done and what that project looked like, and how things have moved and have progressed. It took us a lot longer to finish the project as we had originally planned, which is often the case with this kind of project, as I'm sure Jody will maybe also be able to confirm. We will see later. But in any case, it was a great experience to do this, and I'm happy to be able to speak about it here today. So let me see if I can. Oh, you need to make me a host or give me the right to share my screen, please, so I can show you the presentation. In any case, while I wait for this, I started to work on this project about around 2014, 2015 or so. I'm a religious studies scholar working on Southeast Asia, among other things. I wrote a dissertation on the globalization of the concept of religion and looked at 19th century Thailand. And when I was then part of a project that looked at the periodicals and newspapers published by local Christians in Africa and Asia around 1900, I was looking for a case study that I could work on, and I happened to find in the Philippines the Iglesia Filipina Independiente, the Aglipayan church. And that's about 10 years ago or so, and I since then have been working on this topic, and especially the early history and the periodicals publications of that church. And in this context, I became interested in this archive that I was working in, and in the question of whether it would be possible to maybe somehow help safeguard this project. I hope that you are now seeing the presentation.
Yes, we can.
That's great. Over a longer process, and I'm happy to talk about this in more detail afterwards, after this presentation and in the Q&A, I applied for a grant from the Endangered Archives program, which was accepted and became Project 855 under the title Anti-Colonialism and Religious Independence in the Philippines around 1900, preserving the archival records of the early history of the Iglesia Filipina Independiente. There were a number of objectives for this project: safeguarding the records of the prehistory and early history of the Iglesia Filipina Independiente, documenting the religious self-assertion of the Filipino Ilustrado elite around 1900, so that was a more scholarly objective as well, again, and highlighting an important part of the early history of trans-regional and transcontinental interactions between different non-missionary Asian Christian movements in a developing global colonial public. This was an interest that came out of my research because I was mainly interested in how these periodicals served as a forum where different Christian elites in different parts of Asia, but also beyond Asia, started to get in contact with each other. So, for example, there were letters exchanged around 1900 between independent Catholics in Sri Lanka and also in the Philippines. There was at least some exchange of letters because they read about each other in some newspapers, and then they started to send their publications to each other. And this was very intriguing to me. And all of this is kind of documented in this archive. And so I was interested in this. These are the two people that are kind of well known in the Philippines for this, as the Filipino audience will probably know. Gregorio Aglipay, the first Obispo Maximo of the Iglesia Filipina Independiente, that is also known in the Philippines as Aglipayan Church because of this man, and Isabelo de los Reyes, who was an author and writer and politician, and who was an organizer mostly for this church and wrote a lot of the texts. The periodicals I was talking about, you can see here some of them: La Verdad, La Iglesia Filipina Independiente Revista Católica, and La Redención del Obrero. These were kind of the starting points. So I could talk a lot about this research and kind of this topic, but today we are more talking about this kind of concrete digitalization project. So if you want to know more about this, please ask, but this is not the focus here today. There's a number of publications in German, but also some in English that you can look at if you look for my name. The archives, the digitalization of all the material of the prehistory and early history, so 1880s to 1940s, of the Iglesia Filipina Independiente, which is available or was available at the IFI archive at St. Andrew's Theological Seminary in Quezon City in the Philippines. That was the goal. We have taken about, I think, 12,000 digital photographs. There was this idea to supplement the collection with some additional material. We have finished some part of it, of this project, and we'll see where it takes us next. To have a project in the EAP with a archive that is quite modern in a sense, because it is late 19th and early 20th century, is something, or it was at least when I applied, maybe Jody can say something about this later, not the standard thing that the EAP finances, because a lot of the sources were typoscripts or were even printed here, and normally the focus of the EAP is to safeguard manuscripts, so mostly sources where there basically is only one or just a few handwritten copies. So in our case, we had a lot of printed sources as well, and that was kind of a special case because we argued for the importance of this material and also its endangerment in its current status in the Philippines. The outcomes are two, in the end, for now, a digital copy of the IFI material and the distribution to local international institutions that we have done, and to train the local project team members in archivist and digitalization skills. That was done by us and by the UST, the University of Santo Tomas in the Philippines. We will provide copies too, and have with the British Library, of course, now with the online version, started with this, but there will be copies on hard disks that we are now in the process of submitting to these Philippine and other institutions. Significance of the material is for different, quite a number of different forms of study and disciplines: Philippine studies, people interested in local elites in colonial contexts, mission studies, religious studies, knowledge transfer studies, nationalism, post-colonialism. So there's a broad variety of disciplines that might be interested in the material in this archive that is now available on the website of the Endangered Archive program on the British Library website. There were 3 project phases from 2016 to 2017, visiting the Philippines, preparing digitalization, preparing samples, first phase of digitalization, second phase, and so on. It then took us, because I used to work at the University of Hamburg when I applied for this project, and then I changed jobs to the University of Bonn, where I have been since 2017. And there was a lot of work to be done to start up a new department there. So this is why, one of the reasons why it really took us a long time to finish this project in the end. So the final phase really took a long time, preparing the results and the catalog, and then sending digital copies to the partner institutions, which we are still in the process of doing, and to the British Library. I will give you some impressions of the place and what it looked like, what we were doing. So the St. Andrews Theological Seminary, this is what it used to look like. I haven't been back to the Philippines for quite a while. I'm not sure if there's anyone in the audience who knows more about this, but this is right next to St. Luke's Medical Center in Metro Manila. And I think this building has now been demolished and moved somewhere else because of an expansion of the hospital. This is also one of the reasons why it was good that we did the digitization, why we did it, because right now, because I haven't been able to be in contact with people there for the moment, I am not completely aware where the physical archive now has been placed. This is what the archive looked like when we started. The archive basically was 2 big shelves of boxes with various materials. And we had done a preliminary application to the AAP where we provided some samples and kind of some looking at what the material actually looked like, and then we were encouraged to provide to present a major project application. Still, I think kind of on the lower end of a major project, but that is what we did. And you can already see here our setup in a sense. Here you can see it in more detail. This is the digitization setup that we came up with through looking at earlier AAP projects, conversations with the staff at EAP, and also our own research of what is a good way of digitizing in a kind of semi or professional sense, because of course these small projects cannot buy equipment for hundreds of thousands of euros. Luckily, equipment for digitization is becoming less and less expensive, but still to do some really professional work, you need a kind of a professional setup, and that is what we tried to accomplish with a laptop, a digitization table, some lights that provide this kind of constant light of the same temperature and same intensity, and a good camera positioned overhead, and so on. So this is what we did here. This is part of, or this is our team in the Philippines quite some years ago. You can see me there, and in the middle, the 2 Filipino history BA students. They had finished their BAs at Ateneo, so the fellow in the checkered shirt and the other fellow with the glasses next to him, Ace and Emir, were very helpful over the course of this time to do this digitalization. And this is at UST in the archives at the University of Santo Tomas, where they helped us to give some training to our team and tell us about conservation methods and so on. You can see here also some scanning instructions in progress with some of the equipment that they have there. What does this look like in the result? I will just show you some of the materials in the way that we digitize them. Of course, this is not how it looks in the end on the website. You can look at this for yourself, but you take basically these color control patches that help later scholars to determine what colors these items what they looked like and what colors they had with a kind of standardized color palette. So this is how the digitization then looks from some of the material of the Iglesia Filipina Independiente. We also have some handwritten sources and again, some novenaries and hymn books and so on. Yes, the scholarly context of this project, as I indicated before, is the study of world Christianity in a sense. We published this book, 2016, Discourses of Indigenous Christian Elites in Colonial Societies in Asia and Africa around 1900. And this is where we published some of the sources that were also digitized in the project, and also a special issue of the Journal of World Christianity, where we talked about some of the issues in this project. The larger context were two research projects funded by the German Research Foundation about indigenous Christian elites in journals and periodicals, and then on independent Catholic movements in late 19th and early 20th century, which we are just about to complete, which looks at the independent Catholics in Sri Lanka, but also in the Philippines. One last image. In the last issue of La Iglesia Filipina Independiente, Revista Católica, which is a periodical that was published by the Iglesia Filipina Independiente, you can see kind of their self-understanding. You can see on the left here the Roman Catholicism, how they saw Roman Catholicism around that time, around 1900, as a kind of old-fashioned religion with all the saints in the back and the Pope driving this wagon, while Agli Pai were waving the American flag in a car that signifies progress, and the 20th century is kind of passing by this old Catholicism. So this is kind of the framework that they saw themselves in. Maybe this is how much I present for now, and I'm really happy to go into more detail in some questions and to also talk about more things that you might be interested in.
Thank you. Yeah, so we can maybe there is a chat. Well, you can also put it in the chat box if you have any questions, because that will make us we can see all the questions from everyone at the same time. We can do that as well. Maybe as we wait for questions, can we maybe, Jody, do you want to talk a little bit about the program?
Yes, I'm happy to. And I have to say, I'm just really thrilled to have been invited to this workshop, because I so rarely get to hear a project holder talk about their project. And I'm going to be a little bit cheeky to Adrian because I'm going to ask for some of those photographs. That camera setup really is the example of a sort of model camera setup, and we always like to have those. And for all the participants who may have gone to the EAP website already and looked at this particular project, just to remind you, it's EAP 855. You will see that there is a generic photograph on the project page, and I would love to be able to include the team on that page. It's lovely to see the team who've been working on it. And I also just want to say that the quality of this project's images in particular are very, very good. So it is a sign of a very good project from EAP. Also, because we're focusing on the Philippines, I should point out that this is the first project EAP has had in the Philippines, and therefore is an extremely important one, because EAP pays for the training and pays for the equipment to stay behind in the country. And now that there are people in the Philippines who are already trained, that sort of helps other people apply to the program, because they will be able to probably talk to people who have worked on the project. They will understand what it entails. They will understand the quality of the images that are required, and they will understand the metadata that we've had. So it's always easier when there's been one project in a country than there are subsequent ones. So I am thrilled to be invited for very many reasons. To talk about EAP as a whole, I should point out that we fund lots of different material. As Christina pointed out, we've had projects that have focused on sound recordings, but we have a wide variety of material. We go up to roughly 1950, and that is why Adrian's project fitted nicely within EAP. Our funders, which is called Arcadia, which is a charitable fund of Lisbeth Rousing and Peter Baldwin, have also set up a sister program, which is based at UCLA, which deals with modern archives. So they sort of pick up where we leave off. So they focus primarily on material from 1950 to the present day. And sometimes it's more for EAP, and sometimes it's more for the Modern Endangered Archives Program, MEAP. So I will put that link to that program in the chat function as well. So in the past, we have supported programs that have dealt with manuscripts, with printed material, with newspapers, particularly because newspapers, the paper they're printed on is extremely brittle, and so can corrode. We've supported photographic projects, even temple murals, rock inscriptions. It really is a wide group of material. The process is that a call goes out every September for people to apply. We are completely reactive. We do not go out to regions and say, this material looks important. We wait for people to come to us. So we put out a call in September with a deadline of, I think it's November, for a preliminary application. And this is a fairly short application. And then at the end of the year, people will be either invited to submit a detailed application, or they will be told, perhaps the way this application is in its current format, it doesn't work, go away and rethink about it. Or it might be a case of, this is a sort of project that EAP does not fund. Then if you are invited to a detailed application, you have till about February to submit a much more detailed application. And then what happens is we have an international panel who in April, and it's this week, so this afternoon I moved from this workshop to the panel meeting, they assess all the detailed applications. And each year we fund roughly about 30 projects. And the panel assess these detailed applications on 3 main criteria, and I can never remember what they all are, so I'm going to look down and check my notes, but I will put a link from the EAP website because it's a little hidden, but it is probably the most crucial page on our website if you are interested in applying. And I think I can do that now in the chat function. I think that's the chat. So hopefully you've all seen the EAP web page that's useful. So applications are assessed on 3 criteria: the content of the archive. So it has to be endangered, it has to be at risk. We are not just a digitization program. The material has to be vulnerable for one reason or another. The material also has to have research value. It has to have some sort of academic research value. And then, as I said right at the start, the age of the material for EAP, it has to be before 1950. If the material is primarily, say, the end of the 19th century, but there might be a few items that just go over that 1950 threshold, we would still consider it. But then you have problems of possibly copyright. And this is one of the main reasons why EAP is based in the UK, and the Modern Endangered Archives Programme is based in America, because we have very different rules on copyright and fair dealing versus, oh, I can't remember what the other one is. But anyway, we aren't able to necessarily put material online, whereas in America you can. And that is another prerequisite for an EAP funded project. The material has to be made available on the EAP website for scholars and anybody to access the material for their own research or enjoyment. So that goes with the legal and ethical rights, which is the last point that I've just been talking about. Then the second main theme that the panel judges applications is the project team. So there has to be a good track record of the principal applicant. So they have to be, you know, of sound status. So that is an important point. Then the skills of the team are assessed, whether to do the project there is enough skill set within the team, and then the knowledge of the team. So if you are digitizing a particular language, we would expect somebody who can really understand in depth that language to be part of the team. And it's surprising, very often that might not be factored in, but that would be an important point. And then the last thing is the project plan. So the feasibility of the plan, is the time scale realistic? Are you being overly ambitious? I mean, I think sometimes people apply to EAP and they want to show value for money. So they say they're going to digitize a huge amount of material, and it's just not feasible, particularly if the material is endangered and fragile. So it has to be a realistic time frame and a realistic amount of content. And then another thing that we really focus on is local capacity building. So we expect projects to include some sort of training, and we pay for the funding for that training. As I said, the equipment stays behind in the country with the idea that future projects can continue. And we also pay for archival preservation equipment, so like archival boxing, but we don't pay for conservation. And then the last thing is the budget. The panel really can crack down on the budget. If they think the salaries are too high, they will ask you to look at it. It is important, particularly for salaries. You can go one way or another. I think the panel is very keen to know that people are paid a decent wage and a good wage so that they will stay for the duration of a project. So that's one thing I sort of wanted to flag. I think, I'll put some more things in the links for hopefully help. So I shall put the link for the Modern Endangered Archives Programme, in case you're on this call and you realize that your material is not quite for us. And then one other thing, I think since Adrian's project, EAP produced a book which is freely available on the website to download as a PDF, which sort of talks through the various stages, that tries to help you think of a digitization project, then helps you hopefully with the sort of equipment you would need and the various problems that you might encounter on your way. And this book is called Remote Capture. Oopsie, there we are. And that is the link to the book. And as I say, it's free to download and hopefully will have lots of useful resources for anyone thinking of applying. And I think that's probably it. But of course, I'm very happy with lots of questions.
Thank you, Jody. That's very helpful. There's also, I was looking at the EAP website. There's a lot of resources that are open to people, that other people can use, right, Jody? To just look at the process, kind of they're very helpful. Yes.
So I would recommend you really go to the website and spend a good amount of time looking at all the various pages, because there will be templates of the metadata that we require. There will be templates of the application. The applications will change slightly each year, but you will see the sorts of preliminary application that you would be expected to fill in, and then the detailed, and then the permission forms. And it's really important with the rights that the permission forms are submitted either at the preliminary stage or at the detailed stage. So copies of those are all on the website. So yes, there are lots of resources there.
Okay. So yeah, so we have some questions from the audience.
Yeah, let me just introduce also Philipp Kuster, who has joined us. He has also worked on the project on the Hamburg and later Bonn site as research assistant, and was primarily responsible for the catalog. So in a moment, I will also ask him to give some comments on his work on the catalog, which was really valuable and crucial to finishing this project. I think I'm very happy to hear from Jody that our quality of the images that we produced is of high quality. I hoped that would be the case. So I think it's an interesting case because as I said before, I think this project, I don't know how representative it is that for the IAP program, but for me, it was really, we kind of really wanted to do it in as professional way as we could with the little resources that we had. And I think we achieved that. But for this and some other reasons, it took us much more time than we'd expected. And that is kind of something that happens maybe also in projects that I run a lot, because this is kind of always, it's always this kind of balance that you have to strike, rather between kind of what are the expectations that you have of yourself and of the results and the quality of the results, and then also what time will it take. and at what point do you have to say we just don't have any more time? And in this case, we took more time than we had anticipated, but then we were also very happy with the quality of the results. So it's always this kind of balance that you have to strike. Yes, so let's go to some of the questions for now. So I can share, I will share some of my materials, and maybe if you can take screenshots or whatever, I will, that you're free to do so. Of course, much of this, because it was drafted in 2015, with the technical support and so on, is a little dated, but maybe you will still be able to find the right equipment now. So I'm going to show you, you should see now a list of the technical equipment that we proposed that we would use and that we kind of used. So we used a Windows laptop computer. I mean, of course, now you would buy a different one, but I think that's kind of the basic that you would need for the software that we used, which is a camera software. Where you can basically then connect your camera to the computer and use the software to take photographs through the camera and to catalog them and so on. We applied, you can also see here how things work, because when we applied, we thought that we would use a Nikon camera, but just a year later, when we actually started to buy it, there were new cameras by Sony, and we used a Sony A7 camera. This is the most important thing if you use a camera. So I mean, this is now all talked about, it was already before talked about in the AAP materials that were available, the PDFs and so on, and now probably also in this book in detail, but there are two different ways of doing this, either with scanners or with cameras, right? And if you do a camera setup, then it has certain advantages because you don't have to lay everything flat, but then of course some disadvantages because instead of kind of scrolling through the material just with like a copy machine, you have to take a single photograph, and so all the material has to fit on the kind of image that you take in one go, which means that the bigger your camera sensor is, the better quality the photograph will be. But then, of course, there's also kind of a limit to the size of the images that AAP will accept and can accept because of the size of the final projects. And I think now, even then in 2017 or so, we had reached kind of the equilibrium that we could actually, we could have taken more detailed photographs, but that would have been too big for the database in the end, because of course even the storage space at British Library cannot take just increasing amount of storage. So that will not be the problem anymore, to find a camera that will be basically take high quality images, but you have to kind of investigate which one you want to take. And the most important thing there is to look at the sensor size. So what is the actual physical size of the sensor, and what resolution of images does it take? So here things will change, of course. Where things maybe might stay the same is, for example, copy stands. So the setup that you saw in the photograph was a setup by Kaiser, which is a German production company. I don't think there are that many for this kind of specialized equipment, so this might be something to look at. So Kaiser, Repro, RS1, and some of the additional equipment there might still be the standard that one could use. And then you need some other things, of course. So this is kind of this would be my answer to the setup question. You need a good camera so you can fix it overhead through one of these copy stands. And a background that you put down where you lay the things with mostly like a black, you need the right form of black background that does not reflect. So in the end, I think we used cloth, black cloth and so on. So that is that. And if you, please contact me if you have some concrete questions about this and you're looking to submit a proposal. Of course, it's difficult to get most of these things in the Philippines, so we had to import them, and that's another hassle and so on. And of course, also AAP themselves with their book and Jody and so on will be able to help with this as well, with the kind of continuing knowledge that is built up through the different projects. I think Jody already talked about what are the criteria for identifying endangered archives. For us, you could see that basically this material, some of the material that was printed, for example, was not widely available, especially beyond the Philippines and so on. So that was also important. And some of the printed stuff was already falling apart. So that, of course, is also clearly a sign of endangering. Yes. So I think Philip will talk a bit about the catalog and the metadata in a moment, and then we can add to this. Overcome institutional resistance. So, well, I think one of the things, like Jody already said, one of the problems with going up to 1940, so we cut off our project at 1940. There are other materials in the archive that go beyond 1940, and we did not include them in what we submitted to EIP. Because of the whole copyright and personality privacy reasons. I think in the end, we did not actually have that much institutional resistance. In the beginning, everybody was very excited to do this. We did need some convincing, maybe, for example, at the UST archive to help us, because that was not, of course, their main job, to help us train our team. But in the end, they were also very accommodating and helpful. One of the things I think that was problematic in a sense, or that ended up in a good way, but that could have been a problem that I did not anticipate really, is we did not really think so much in the beginning about where the actual digitization would take place. So where we would do it, because I also did not really think too much about that. It took, I think, a whole year. So basically we needed to put the setup somewhere for a whole year, right? And the archive was located in the normal library of the institution. And that would not have worked. That's where we started. We put it up there, just as in a part of the library. But that would have disrupted the library activities, and the library activities would have disrupted our digitization. So if there's no other space available, of course, you can always make do. But luckily, there was very close to the library, just like basically 10 meters outside of the entrance of the library, there was another room available that basically was unused or not really in use. And so they gave us this room for this whole year to do the, in the building that you saw before, in the St. Andrews building, to do the digitization. And that was, of course, crucial. Without that, we would not have been able to do it. And there was some, because it was a quite complicated situation, because the St. Andrews Seminary is not actually a institution of the Anglican Church, of the Iglesia Filipina Independiente, but rather it is an institution of the Episcopal Church in the Philippines, so the Anglican Church. And there is a close collaboration between these two. But in a certain sense, the IFI archive, they hosted it, but it was not really their own history. So they were very supportive. But for example, there was a moment where basically they thought maybe we would pay for the use of this room for the whole year, right? And that is something, I don't know if EAP would pay for something, but that at least we certainly didn't put this into the application. So we had no money for this at all, of course. So there was maybe a little institutional resistance where we had to convince them, look, we're doing this in a way also for your own sake, for the history of the Philippines and also of your church and this institution. So please allow us to use this room. And luckily then we were able to overcome these things, but that's maybe, of course, the problem is, what are the things you can clear up beforehand, and what are the things that come up during the project, and how will you then deal with them with the limited resources that you have? A little additional problem that we had, but that is not something you should hopefully run into, is that during the course of our project, there was a bit of a financial situation, and the value of the British pound plummeted a bit. So that was something where we had to reconsider a bit our plan, because suddenly we could get less euros for the British pounds that we had been granted. But of course, that's also something that sometimes happens. You have to take care of it. Next question was OCR, or transcription. There is no OCR that we did, and I don't think EAP includes any OCR at the moment, because most of the things, manuscripts, there is not yet a good system that could do that. I think the photographs are of high enough quality that maybe sometime in the future, if amazing recognition algorithms might be developed for handwritten stuff as well, you could do that. And some of the things that we digitized, the typoscripts and typewritten stuff and printed stuff, you could do OCR on, but we have not done that. We also did not transcribe individual pieces, really. It would have been too much anyway, but that is also not really the goal, the main goal. But of course, you need to look at some things for the catalog and so on. Yeah, before I think I go into more of the other questions, let me turn it over to Philip for a moment. Or maybe first to Jody. Jody, if you want to say anything to the things that I said, and then maybe we'll ask Philip to give some input.
Well, first of all, I'm really hopeful that the pound doesn't crash even further. But yes, these sorts of issues, you don't really know when you're applying, and it's really quite hard. The one thing, interestingly, about the room, we do expect, if your project is based at the institution where the material is held, there are so many varieties of different projects. Sometimes it's so endangered that the material has to be moved from one place to an institution. It never leaves the country where the archive is. We expect it always to stay in the country. And also we expect there to be an archival partner in the country that looks after the digitized content. And they, in theory, have the master digital copy, and just a secondary copy comes to EAP, and our role is to make that available. But going back, if there is a institution where the archival material is held and they will be overseeing the digitization, the panel does expect some sort of input from that institution as part of the project. That might be if the people working on it are full-time employees and this is considered a priority for the institution, you probably wouldn't budget for salaries. If it's outside of their work hours, then you would. But importantly as well, with rooms, if it's in the institution, you would expect the institution to give that room for free as part of the project. If, however, you are working somewhere else and you're bringing in and you have to actually pay for a room while the digitization goes on, which would be a completely different model, then of course the panel would consider it. I have to be honest, the panel are really good at looking through the budget and querying and questioning every single line, but it's very difficult because there are so many different models of EAP projects.
Thank you. And so Philip, please give us some of your experiences of this project, your work, your part on it, and the catalog and so on.
Yes, my name is Philip. I just finished my master's degree in history at the University in Munich. And throughout my studies, I've also worked as a student assistant for Adrian. And so my part in this project was to prepare everything for the eventual publication. So I received all the photographs and the first version of the catalog from our two colleagues in the Philippines. And then I continued on from there. And so to answer the question about the metadata, our two team members in Manila did this manually. So while they were photographing all the documents, they created this catalog of information about containing the titles and so on, the years, the languages, and they had the relevant expertise for that because they could recognize which Philippine language, for example, was spoken or written in these documents. So yes, all I did was then edit the catalog to some extent and check whether all these photographs were all right, which they were. So that was not the difficult part. The difficulties then came with editing the actual files and the catalog, because the first version of the catalog contained all the files that were digitized. And so there were far more than we could eventually publish, because halfway through the project, it became clear that we could only publish the files from before 1940. And so we had to basically separate the catalog and especially all the files into these two groups. So files from before 1940 and after 1940. And because that was not a relevant category when we started, that was kind of a difficulty, because I had to go through all the items in the catalog and separate out these entries. And what was especially difficult was I then had to identify all the photographs that corresponded to these items. And so I had to go through these photographs and then look for the titles. And because they were handwritten, that was often not very easy. So for future projects, it's probably a good idea to clear this up before starting. So that you can then organize everything according to these categories. And that means basically that we have a lot more files now than the ones that you can see now on the EAP website. And one question will be what will we do with the other files? Because maybe we can make them available for the IFI so that they can at least make them accessible to researchers or for their own use in the archives. Just to give you an idea, in the complete catalog that we received, there are 12,076 items. And in the eventual catalog for all the files that we uploaded, there are 1,665 items. So that means that we still have 85 to 90% of the files here in our hard drives, and they are not yet accessible. So that's kind of a future project. So yeah, maybe that's the most important point that I can make here, because my work mostly consisted of looking at thousands of photos one by one. So that's not too exciting.
If I can jump in, because metadata is just so important for an EAP project. And it's lovely that Philip did all of that, because it meant that when we actually received the hard drive, it was very quick to then put on the EAP website. Sometimes that process isn't done, and we've got legacy projects that we just don't have the people power to sort out lots of issues, and so we have to go through them slowly, but it can take a long time if that matching up hasn't been done. So we have the images, they're on our servers, we have some sort of metadata, but it makes it very difficult to put online. So it's lovely to hear that you did all that hard work. One thing I would really stress, learning from past experiences with our projects, is that very often projects tend to do the digitization first, and then they do the metadata afterwards. And again, it was lovely to hear from Philip that on EAP 855, this didn't happen. The metadata was captured while the digitization was happening. And this is the ideal, because you've got to have the physical material in front of you with the images and creating the metadata to make sure that it's all smooth, because if you just have the images and you no longer have the physical material with you, you have to rack your brains, you can't remember, images might get into a muddle. So really metadata and digitization at the same time is truly ideal. And I would also say things have hopefully improved since EAP 855, because we are aware that many projects have had problems with metadata. But it's really important for us. We do it on an Excel spreadsheet, and the Excel spreadsheet then gets imported into the British Library catalogue, and our website pulls the catalogue records from the British Library catalogue to the website. So if we're unable to put it into the catalogue, we're unable to make the material available on the EAP website. So it really is quite crucial. So because many projects have had difficulties, what we do now is if you get an EAP grant, we send out a questionnaire to try and find out the material and certain sort of questions. And then we custom make your Excel spreadsheet with macros so that it's hopefully easier for you to fill out the Excel spreadsheet. And very importantly, with both the images and the metadata, we ask that within the first 3 months of your project, you must send sample images and sample metadata to the EAP office. And if you have reached 100 images, we expect to see those images, because sometimes projects are so keen, they've got their equipment, you know, they're so excited to get started that they've digitized 3,000 images. They then send it and we notice some real problems with the images, and it's soul destroying for everybody. So we say, if you've started digitizing with the first 100 images, you must send them to the EAP office. And once you've started digitizing, send your Excel spreadsheet. Then what is also slightly different now is if your project is a longer project, you have to submit interim reports every 6 months. You don't get the whole funding at the start of the project. You get a good chunk at the start that will allow you to pay for the equipment, pay for the training, flights if people need to fly to certain areas. But then it is divided up and you get tranches of money every 6 months. And before you get your next payment, the metadata and the quality of the images have to be signed off so that we're keeping a track of the project as it goes along. I think that's really important. I see there are questions in the Q&A which we've not been looking at. We've only been looking at the chat, but I see the next one, because I've got the floor, about images. Are they IIIF? They are all IIIF compliant. So the images on our website are IIIF. If people on the call don't know what IIIF means, it means that each image has a manifest, which means we use a certain platform to make our images available, but you can pull that manifest and share it in a different app, a different platform. And in theory, you could look at 2 images side by side. It makes it really quite exciting for researchers that you can pull these manifests. So yes, the EAP material, the images are all IIIF. So that's me.
Thank you. That was also very, very interesting. So let's see some other of these questions. So there are questions by James Bland, so I will answer some of them. So let me share with you my application to give you some insight on how that worked. I hope that is working now. Yes, so this is the major application grant, or it used to be this way. I'm not sure if it changed a bit. That was from August 2014. And so basically, the question is, so what conditions, measurements we gave about the collection, and what metrics did we use to indicate that this would be a good match for EAP. In the description of the specific outcomes, so I think what always helps for these kinds of applications in general, but maybe Jodie can say something from her perspective, is really kind of like a pre-structuring of the reading experience for the readers, right? To give like bullet points and numbers and so on, because if you have one wall of text, it's always difficult to find what you need to look for. So when I apply for these sorts of things, I always try, and in this case, because it's an even more practical kind of application than like a normal research project where you say like, okay, these are questions, we don't really know yet what we will find. So here are some ideas, but this was a really practical thing. So basically you try to use a lot like for 1, 2, 3 and bullet points and so on to say like, yes, we try to give this digital copy, skills and so on. And then we were estimating, and of course, sometimes it's difficult to do these estimations, but what we estimated was 250 letters, circular letters, boxes of photographs, signed manuscripts, periodicals. So I think maybe one of the things that is good is to basically try to give a kind of detailed look that shows to a EAP that you have actually engaged with the archive already, right? If you basically only say, well, there are about 100,000 photographs in unknown quantity of boxes, in unknown quantity of rooms, well, then they will probably say, well, maybe you go there and look first what exactly is available, and then you see. So I tried, and of course you also have to be truthful, right? So it's always this kind of thing, what and how much, and also the detail that you give. But I try to say, okay, we were there and this is what we found, and we try to give some quite good and detailed impression of what the archive looked like. So maybe in this kind of 10-line paragraph, I think that might be kind of a good thing. Of course, if you describe like every second photograph in detail, that is also not what EAP wants at this moment. But I think this is kind of, you need to show, basically, I think you will need to demonstrate that you actually know the archive and kind of know what is available there. So this is, I think, the measurements we gave. And it's actually quite interesting. I mean, this I haven't looked at this in a while, and I wouldn't have guessed that we were so accurate, because as Philip now said, if it was actually 12,700 or so, then in estimating 1,200 digital photographs, I think that's much closer than I would have expected that we would actually land to this. So again, we did probably know the archive well enough to kind of estimate what was actually in it. Yes, the significance, like I said already in the presentation, I think we tried to show, of course, that this is not just specialized material, right? I mean, of course, even endangered archives that are very specialized can be very helpful and very valuable, and I'm sure they will also be financed by or funded, these projects, by EAP. So I don't know, maybe like records of plants in a certain region where you have something that is very, very interesting for students of the history of botanical studies or biology, or and larger history, but maybe not so interesting for historians of politics, even though you can of course always make an argument that everything is kind of interesting for all disciplines. But in any case, we try to show that this material is really contains stuff that is relevant for all sorts of disciplines, right? Not just a particular one. Yes, then we try to give some idea of the history of the archive and where it was and why it is endangered, right? And we described kind of what we will do there. So this is kind of, so basically the application, I think that's probably still the case, is this kind of process of giving answers to a lot of these questions that are asked by the application form and fill out these forms. So it's actually a kind of application that is a bit easier maybe than some other free-form applications for research projects and so on, where you have to basically make your own structure or kind of have a more general structure. Here you have quite detailed questions that you have to answer for this, and then some of the budgetary constraints and so on. So there's a lot of forms that you have to fill out. But yeah, here another one we can see again kind of the different forms of material for the copyright questions. So this is this. And we also submitted a supplement. I don't remember. I think this is something that is suggested, I think. I'm not sure if this was something that we came up with. No, I think that is something that that is basically asked for. I'm not 100% sure. But that's what we did, basically showing some of the status of the records. And so we gave a list of about 15 examples, selected photographs of archival material, which of course is not the final digitization form, but rather like what does it look like? So to give the board an idea, this is probably also a good idea to give them an idea what is this place and what is kind of the way that these things looked, what they looked like when we encountered them. So you can see here also the endangered. Of course, we try to kind of show that also in visual form that this is kind of endangered, right? With kind of some of the things really on the verge of falling apart. Some nice photographs and then a kind of different sample of the different things that we saw there. Maybe this is also a good moment to ask one question that to Jody also again, that I would be interested in, because one of the things, so we had hoped that we would be able to also help with the conservation efforts in a certain sense while we are doing the digitization, because it seemed that in any case, some of the digitization would only be possible after kind of doing something about the conservation, right? So let me show you one more thing about this, just as an example. So this is, for example, these are 3 of the things that we encountered in the archive, and this first one is of course the most obvious. So actually the title page of this tract, to digitize it in a way that it is fully readable, we would have to actually first repair it, right? And I had hoped that that is something we would be able to do. But the problem there was, so I'm not an archivist and not even a trained historian. Philip now has finished his master's in history, but also is not focusing, as far as I know, on early modern manuscripts or on conservation efforts in archives, right? So the problem was there was not really a lot of knowledge on my side and on side of the team itself on how to do this. So that would be the first thing. If you expect that a lot of the material is not only endangered, but also already partly damaged, then involve someone who has the requisite experience, because that would have been really helpful in our case. I did try to do this then in the Philippines, which was also, of course, a good idea to do this with local people, because then they will already be available for you there. With the UST archive, and they do have this experience. And so what we did is we basically had the research team, that the 2 Filipino researchers and digitization assistants, they did do some training of how to do repairing of these kind of things and how to encase some material in a kind of in an archivist way into the right form of plastic protectors or other things. But in the end, and we did also spend some of the budget to buy things to do this ourselves and so on. We actually did not really do it, because it turned out that, first of all, to do this, even with the training of a week or so, of course, the 2 people were not really able to actually do this for like really damaged material. And the problem, of course, with this kind of thing is if you do it wrong one time, then it's gone, right? So you should really know what you're doing. But also the problem is we had not budgeted for this, right? So the professional people at UST, we could not pay them to do it, even if they would have had time, which I'm not sure they would have had, but maybe if we would have cleared this early enough, we would have been able to make some arrangement. But also we did just not include this in our budget. And so I would be interested in hearing from Jody something about, in general, EAP's kind of attitude towards this question of conservation while digitizing, or this relationship, and also whether it would, for example, in our case, have been possible to include, because if you start to do it, you would have to include quite a sizable amount of money for this kind of thing, to do it actually professionally, or what to do with these kind of situations, right? In the end, we ended up doing our best in kind of, straightening out some of this kind of page and then taking a photograph of it, and then at least we have that. But we're not really able to do conservation in this project. We didn't have the expertise, we didn't have the money, we didn't have the time. So yeah.
I think you've sort of answered your question. So many of our projects, I mean, we've had projects in 90 different countries in various locations, and the problem is, there may not be trained conservators in all of these regions. And as you say, if somebody tries and does something and does it incorrectly, you have the risk of actually making things worse than better. So, and it's just the policy from our funders that we do not pay for conservation. So we do not pay for working on the material. Another reason is because that just adds so much more time to a project. But what we do pay for is preservation, ensuring that the material will not get any worse. So we will pay for dehumidifiers if you're in a location where there's a real problem, and you need to keep the content in drier conditions. We will pay for archival boxing, Melinex, all these sorts of items that just make sure that the material doesn't get any worse, but unfortunately we don't pay for conservation. Though I can imagine it's frustrating and a lot of people try and include it in their applications.
Yeah, so this is the other thing. So we did buy some of these things, but again, we had not, because that was something I had not really been able to research this enough. So during the course of the project, I learned a lot about these things. So everything you just said with Melinex and so on, I'm able to, I kind of know what that is now, but I did not know in the beginning. And so we also did not really budget for that. So we bought some of the stuff, but in the end, we would have needed much more. It was also really, I mean, this is kind of, I'm gonna maybe limit what I'm saying here, because this is always, of course, kind of a difficult situation. How do you actually get these things to where you need them, right? So it was quite an adventure how to actually get all the stuff to the Philippines, because it was not available there, right? Not everything. Some things were, and that was great. We did actually re-encase, so basically all of the material were in these folders, and I think they were kind of standard office folders. And so we acquired archival folders that are of a different paper quality. And during the digitization process, all of them were rehoused in new folders. But for example, we did not buy new boxes, because the boxes were actually already archival quality boxes. They were quite old. It would have been nice to also do that, but that would have been expensive and so on. So some of the things were available in the Philippines, other things were not. And once I was on the way to the Philippines through Canada, because I was at a conference there, and there were some really good suppliers of things in Canada. So I went on a kind of supply hunt for some things in Toronto, which was quite an adventure, because I was somewhere out in the outskirts of Toronto at the kind of the depot of this manufacturer of these materials, and had ordered them a week before from Germany. And then I went there to pick them up, and I had a big box of stuff, and I had no car and so on. And I somehow brought that with me with some big bags to the Philippines. So that is the kind of thing, because that was some of, for example, these Melinex plastic kind of a certain form of plastic sheet that is of archival quality, and we could get them in this way. So these are the kind of things you have. Where do you source these sorts of materials is another big question, of course. Again, of course, if you do it well and professional in the beginning, then of course you will be able, for example, to say, well, we need some way to pay for postage or to kind of bring these things to our place. That I think will be possible in our case. These were some of the things that I only learned about during the project. So in the end, we had to make do with the budget that we had at the time. Yes, but so that distinction is maybe very good and very important. So basically, no, in a way, conservation efforts or kind of reparative efforts, but efforts of kind of keeping the things from being more damaged by housing them in the right folders or right boxes and so on. This is the situation for EAP as far as I understand. Okay.
And if we quickly jump in again, again about archival boxes, I can think of projects that have come to mind that have bought boxes, or they've actually been able to make the boxes where they are. So they've just imported the card, the archival quality card, and then made the boxes locally, which is of course cheaper. This was true of several projects that we had in Mali, in Djenné in Mali. So there are different ways of doing it that have different price implications, but this is important, so don't scrimp on it. The other thing about the application process, this was from 2014, and the application has changed somewhat. We are now sticklers for the amount you can put in a box. It will suddenly cut off, which must be very frustrating if you're really passionate about your archive and you want to be able to say as much as you can. But now it suddenly stops mid-sentence if you've not been concise. And we do encourage, as you saw from Adrian's application, a list of some of the more important content so that the panel can really understand what you're talking about. Now this would be incorporated in the application rather than an appendix. And we allow 1 or 2 images. So again, the panel can assess how the current state it is in, or either the content or where the material is being held. And the whole application has to be less than 10 megabytes, or otherwise it doesn't come through to us properly. So those things have probably changed, but they're important things, because if it's too big, we just don't get it.
Yes, that's good to hear. So there's some streamlining there. So some of the questions you won't have to answer for yourself, but you will be basically helped by the application process. That's good. Yeah, I think this is the answer to these questions. The other question about putting the team together. So like I said, depending on the way that the archive looks, or what the status is, it would be good to maybe have some more archivist expertise. The problem, of course, was also here, which is not the case, hopefully, well, depending on the archive situation, is probably actually more often the case than not, is that there was no local archivist at the archive, right? So this archive basically, they had no one. I mean, it was in a library and there were librarians, and historically there must have been an archivist, because it was put together quite professionally as an archive at some point in time, probably in the 70s, 60s or so, I would guess. And then again, maybe later in the 90s or so. But there was no archivist on site at the moment. And so there was no one we could work with there. Maybe in some other cases you do have someone there, which then of course helps. That helps already a lot. I had some connections to some institutions in the Philippines, like Ateneo de Manila and UST, and so I asked them to help me with finding some people that could actually do the work of the digitization. And that was, of course, this is something I would definitely recommend, to work with people that that you might know at institutions that, for example, if you have some professors that you know at the institutions there, they could recommend some of their grad students or MA or BA students or people that have just finished degrees. I'm sure there's people always looking for jobs in these situations. And so that was the case there. And through the history department of Ateneo, I was able to get to these two wonderful historians that helped us then. Because you asked also any advice for a grad student who hasn't put together a group project. So this, of course, varies with whatever your situation is and how you do the projects that you accomplish normally. But I think I would actually discourage you from doing this on your own as a grad student, this kind of project. I'm not sure what Jody's opinion on this is, basically, because of course it's always great to have applications for EAP, and I would encourage that in general as well. But I would probably recommend to team up with someone who has a permanent appointment somewhere to have an institutional backing. Because as in my case, this kind of projects do take a lot of time. They add a lot of academic value to, you know, the historical knowledge, but they are not as much valued, of course, on your CV as maybe some other things that you could spend your time on. And also it can take much more time than you anticipate. And so I had this exact postdoc in one of the projects that I was running, was planning on applying for this for Ceylon during the project that we were running, and they were already kind of preparing it with local partners, and that would have been a wonderful project. And I hope that at some point there's still time to do this, because there is so much interesting material there that they wanted to digitize. But at a certain moment, I discouraged them from continuing this further, because I could see that basically this person had only like 1.5 years left on their contract, and they had a lot of things to accomplish in the project that she was already involved in. And I'm extremely then the pandemic came and so on. So I'm extremely happy that in the end, she did not take on this responsibility of an EAP project during this time, because it would have been really a problem. So by all means, go ahead if you feel secure in your position, or if you have the right plans. And of course, it depends if you have 5 years of funding left and so on. That, of course, it's a different thing. But my recommendation would actually be to, and that is sadly always the case, to work together with tenured faculty or people on permanent positions, so that they can at least pick up some of the of kind of the weight of having this kind of project on your hand. And in any case, you do need an institution on the one hand, or you can apply as an independent scholar, but then there's a kind of similar or a kind of different process, I think. But that would be my recommendation, to have someone who kind of can, you know, carry the weight of this if, for example, your situation might change as a grad student.
And if I could just also add to that, if you are a PhD student and you're wanting to apply to EAP, it's rare that we give these sorts of projects, but we do sometimes, and your supervisor has to write a letter of support, because we're aware that sometimes PhD students have got their own funding to go somewhere to do research, but it is an additional workload as well as your PhD. So it's not necessarily encouraged. It has happened in the past, but as I say, a letter of support from your supervisor has to be included as well. Sorry if just because I've got one question is are there any resources and training for creating metadata? For EAP, I'm just, no, that doesn't look right. I had it up on my website yeah, or maybe it is. Well, try the link. I'm just about to put in the chat, and those are the resources that we have provided to help people with cataloging.
Yeah, and just one last sentence on this, because it's really a pity that but this is the way our system is at the moment, right? Like if you don't have a permanent position, you really need to figure out how to deal with your time and how to distribute it, and it's really a question of where you can invest this time, right? And this kind of keeping of historical sources is such a valuable thing, but yeah, we can only do so much in the time that we have. So I think we only have a few minutes left, right? So I think the fascinating archival materials, I will just give one little glimpse, and you will find it on the website. I don't know where exactly you would have to hunt for it, but there was a really interesting photograph of Isabelo de los Reyes, one of the people that I showed a photograph of before, while he was doing a Bible translation that was later published with the Bible Society. So that was an interesting kind of at work situation that we encountered, and some interesting letters, of course, sent from the US, but also from this exchange between the Philippines and Sri Lanka. That is quite interesting too. So there are a number of fascinating things in there, and I'm sure there's lots of things still to be discovered that even I have not really seen. And the other last question about experience with institutions and copyright and so on. Yes, I think all in all, we had a quite good, I think, result. I think the problem is, in a sense, it depends a lot. I think lots of the things that you do there depend a lot on how bureaucratic your own institution is going to be. Luckily, at the University of Hamburg, in the end, it was really, they were very, very helpful, because, for example, one of our assistants, they did not have a bank account in the Philippines. And so in the end, I ended up basically handing out money, like in cash, to people in the Philippines, and they gave me receipts, and then I submitted these receipts and I got reimbursed in Hamburg. And that was really not the way that normally, like, the administration was expecting things to go in Hamburg, but they were able to and willing to accommodate that. So it depends also on the relationship that you have to the bureaucracy of your own institution, how flexible you'll be able to deal with these situations, because sometimes, depending on where your archive is located, you might run into these kind of issues, or basically you have to buy some stuff on the market, you know, in somewhere, some the materials or technical stuff, and then you have to get reimbursed and so on. So I think that was one of the challenges that we had, and the contracts, of course, as well, that we had to sign, and so these sorts of things sometimes go beyond what the institutions, the home institutions, expect if they don't have a lot of experience with this. I think SOAS probably has more experience with kind of dealing with contracts with people all over the world, but Hamburg was kind of more, you know, they were expecting, well, you know, normally we deal with like German institutions or suppliers and so on, and now it's about cash and, you know, handwritten receipts and so on. This is not really what we were looking for, but in the end they were really helpful, and so I think that was helpful as well.
I guess, Adrian, I think maybe the question was also more like, you know, how they're private collectors, and you know, sometimes they feel like digitizing the content of their archive loses value once you get access to the content. What can you say something about that, maybe?
Yes, so this is a thing that I'm actually still this is going to be a question that will concern us now as well, because I mean, this project is, so I don't have any I'm not worrying about the whole thing in itself, because up to the top of the institution, people were involved in this, right? So the current Obispo Maximo of the Iglesia Filipina Independiente attended these events that we held for the opening and closing of the project, and they were all involved. But I'm not 100% sure that all people at all levels of these institutions were all aware what exactly this project is actually going to entail, right? Like, so I'm going to be interested in seeing what happens now that the things are online, like whether we will receive at a certain point in time someone at some level of one of the institutions involved that says, well, but we were not actually aware that this is what is going to happen with it, right? So I did my best to make them aware, and I, of course, all the people signed the requisite papers that had to sign them, and people were aware and on all levels. But of course, you might always run into people that say, well, we actually, we didn't really understand what this means or what this entails. So I think this is going to be an interesting question now, then when I will have the time to go to the Philippines the next time, and when hopefully the pandemic will be over. At a certain time, that we will be able to engage with people there locally again, and because there's still some work to be done to kind of distribute our photographs locally to the different institutions and so on.
Just a quick note from me, and I don't know whether it's appropriate, but once material is available, and yes, there are some people who have collections and are worried about losing their grip on their own content, but I am finding it's lovely, when people come across archival material that they didn't know. I get so many letters from relatives saying, I didn't realize my great grandfather had such and such an archive. And that's the joy of making it open access. Also, and this is the bit I don't know whether I should admit to, I find my job is slightly turning into a picture librarian, that people are contacting me because they are doing research on the archive. They want to have a copy of an image for their article or for their book. And what we say is, I liaise with the project lead when that happens. And very often the host institution or the archival partner gets a copy of the book or the article. And so it's a win-win. They will find out more about the current research that's happening on their content. And it's truly fantastic when that happens. I'm so sorry, but I'm conscious of the time, and I'm going to have to go off to the panel meeting. But there were just a few things I wanted to say before I go. Is that I will put my email in the chat, and if anybody is thinking of a project, the earlier you start thinking about it, the better. And do contact me by email. As I say, the call will go out in September. So we have a Twitter account that we will probably mention it through Twitter. So do follow us on Twitter. We have a blog as well. And so we will make an announcement on our blog. And we also have just started doing a newsletter, and hopefully all those links are on our website. So do follow us. I really hope to see more applications from the Philippines in September. That would be a really lovely thing to see, and do feel free to get in touch.
Thank you, Jody. Last words, Adrian, before we go.
Well, I'm very happy for that everyone that participated asked questions, and people are so interested in this. It's a really great program. I'm very happy that this exists, and I still have quite a number of years of working on different projects ahead of myself, I hope. So maybe there will be another EAP in my future as well. We will see. But at the moment, I'm very happy that this is that this was able to be published. We still have to do some cleaning up work to do at to finish this really. But the most important thing is that the photographs are online, and this is has happened now. And I'm happy to have been able, with Philip's help and the others, to finish this, and with the great support of Jody and the others at the EAP. So again, I want to thank, of course, not just Christina for organizing this and for hosting this workshop, which was a really great idea, but also, again, very much to EAP for financing this and for bearing with us during the times where it took so much longer than we had anticipated. But I'm quite happy with the result, and I'm happy that this is online now. Thank you so much for all of this.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Bye.
much indeed. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.